study. So you were, I had originally talked, and you had asked me way back before this call, like, what's the right to bear arms? Like, why should we have guns? Where does this come from? And I gave you the answer because God doesn't tell us that we should.
Right, exactly. Which I thought was honestly, not a very good answer.
Right.
And I, by the way, I say all this as a gun owner, as a gun enthusiast, as a guy who owns a fair number of guns and likes guns like that.
Yeah.
No,
and I get that, and I totally understand that, and that's why I didn't lead this conversation with that, and I probably wouldn't lead if anyone ever asked me, because there's ample other things in the Bible to point to in regards to self-defense that we could know before we get to that. But when you understand, when you get to the depths, I'm going to say the depths, because everyone has some understanding of the idea of liberty, right? This is an idea that I'm working on. I think it's really powerful, and I think it's accurate to the definition of liberty. There's gradations of liberty. Right? Like there's different depth, just like the gospel. The gospel's wide, it's high, it's deep. Like there's all, you got to come into the understanding of it. Same thing with the idea of liberty. That's why the verse James 1:25, somebody just reads over it, oh, God, the perfect law of liberty. Like, okay, cool, get it, whatever, perfect law of liberty, got it. When you understand the ramifications of God's perfect law of liberty and the way it works out in society and institutions and self-government and the church and obviously salvation, like liberty from God's law, it's mind-blowing. It literally you want to talk about having a final cause, like a final cause to die for, which is literally what the Declaration of Independence is known as. It's known as a final cause document. Yeah. Because it's the final causes. These are the causes we could die for. Give me liberty or give me death. There is a reason that statement is as powerful as it was to ignite this revolution. Yeah. And so when it comes down to the fact that God didn't give us a law that says don't bear arms, if you understand what liberty means, it's huge. It means that God did not give us any moral law. He did not label it sin. There was nothing against owning a weapon. And in fact, when we pair that idea, the liberty, and the fact that God didn't tell us to own arms or to not own arms, and then you pair that with your duty, the commands that he has commanded you to do, you are free. You are at liberty to use whatever means necessary to do your duty to God, your neighbor, and your country.
Yep.
So those ideas, like
I see now that's a stronger argument than what I previously understood it to be. So,
but that's the thing, right? I mean, it's how much we have to have this conversation for the strength of that to come out. Because I'm just like, well, God didn't tell us not to.
Right. Then I'm like, well, there's a lot of things that God didn't tell us not to do,
And then I could rant about liberty, and I'm like, well, you're right. He does tell us that we can eat meats, even meats that were sacrificed to idols. But
so if I understand this properly, there's God's law is essentially a bunch of negative claims. Do not do this. Do not do that.
Mostly negative, but there are positives.
Sure. There are things like
love your God. Love God. Don't have
Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, right? Yeah. Honor your father and mother, right? But there are also things that are negatives, right?
Yeah.
And typically those are the ones that we point to when we're going to punish somebody, and we say, well, the law says do not murder, and they murdered, therefore they're guilty of the law. So what you're arguing is that set of negative statements, that set of negative laws, together with the set of positive laws, give us a kind of picture of human, a space of human freedom that is allowable under God's law. And owning a firearm, owning property, getting married, things like that, those are all allowable freedoms under the constraint of God's law.
Yeah, you are at liberty to use whatever means necessary to do your duty to God, your neighbor, and your country.
Yep.
You are at liberty to use whatever means necessary to do your duty to God, your neighbor, and your country.
Yep.